The changing of names in the sense of changing the person is also seen in the case of Jacob and Peter. For the fulfilling of God's purpose, Jacob's name was changed to Israel. A hill holder, a supplanter Jacob, was changed into a prince of God Israel. If Jacob had remained a supplanter, he could never have been used by God in the fulfillment of the divine purpose. Jacob had to be changed into a prince of God. For the building of the church, Peter's name, Simon, was changed to Cephas, which means a stone. Peter's natural being was muddy, and he had to be transformed into a stone, even a precious stone, for God's building, to fulfill the divine purpose. The sufficient grace for fulfilling God's purpose. By the Lord's mercy, we have no confidence in ourselves or in anyone else. We do not have confidence in people because we have learned that no one is qualified to fulfill God's purpose. Whatever we can produce is just an Ishmael. The proper church life is not concerned with anything human or natural. The proper church life is that which carries out God's eternal purpose through being supplied with the riches of God Himself. Whatever we are able to do means nothing in the fulfilling of God's eternal purpose. All that is needed for the fulfillment of God's purpose is the supply of the divine order. So we must drop ourselves, depreciate our natural strength and ability, and walk before God, drinking of the riches of His order. If we do this spontaneously, some element of His divine being will be brought into us to produce the seed for the fulfillment of His purpose. This is the proper church life. We have seen that both the seed and the land are Christ. Now we need to see that the seed and the land are not only Christ, but also we. After drinking of God's rich supply, we all shall become the seed and the land. Eventually, the seed becomes the land. For the fulfilling of His purpose, God needs a people to possess the land. In that land, God will have a kingdom to be built up with His habitation for His name. This is God's purpose. Since we are the seed, the people to fulfill God's purpose, we, the seed, shall also become the land. Among and within us, God has His dominion, and in this dominion, God has a kingdom in which He may build up His habitation. We become the seed and the land by enjoying the riches of God and by having God brought into us. God and we and God are one in producing the seed and possessing the land. This is something heavenly on earth. It is better, the gate of heaven, with the heavenly ladder joining earth to heaven and bringing heaven down to earth. Here we have God and man and God joined together to be a mutual habitation. How is this fulfilled? By the unveiling of the divine being and the changing of the human person. Once we have been changed, then we are qualified to enjoy the unveiled God as our grace. God has been unveiled, but this unveiled God needs the changed person. Regardless of who or what we are, we all need to be changed from having natural character to having spiritual character. Change from our source to the divine order for the supply we need to fulfill the divine purpose. We need to forget ourselves, cease from our natural source of supply, walk before God, and drink of His order all day long. Then the riches of the unreal divine being will be brought into our human being as the all-sufficient grace for us to fulfill the divine purpose. The Apostle Paul labored more abundantly than all the apostles, yet it was not he but the grace of God that was with him. By the grace of God he was what he was. He fulfilled God's purpose in his ministry by enjoying the Lord's sufficient grace. Paul surely was drinking of the divine order to receive the sufficient supply of grace. He did not exercise his natural strength to produce Ishmaels, but enjoyed the rich supply of the sufficient grace to bring forth many Isaacs. He lived and worked in the way of no longer I who live, but Christ. the real changing of a name is the change from I to Christ. El Shaddai, the all-sufficient grace supplier. Only Christ, not I, can fulfill God's purpose. Life Study of Genesis. Message 49. Knowing grace for the fulfillment of God's purpose. The circumcision for the fulfillment of God's purpose. In the book of Genesis, nearly all the divine truths are sown as seeds. In this message, we come to a great and basic truth in the Holy Word that is sown as a seed in Genesis 17, circumcision. In order to understand circumcision, we need to see two main points of the divine revelation unfolded in the Bible. The first is that God's eternal purpose is to have himself expressed and represented by man on earth. This matter is revealed throughout the whole Bible, from the first chapter of Genesis through the last chapter of Revelation. The second point concerns God's way of accomplishing his purpose. God's way to fulfill his purpose is to work himself into man as man's life and everything, so that man may become his expression and representation. The accomplishment of God's purpose does not depend upon what we can do, but upon God's working himself into us. If we see these 2 points, then we can understand the basic truths in the Bible. For the fulfillment of his divine purpose, God called Abraham out of Chaldee, a land of demons and idolatry. As we have seen, Abraham did not give a clear-cut answer to God's call, but dragged his feet through mud and water. His father brought him to Haran, the halfway place. By God's mercy, Abraham answered God's call, nearly in a full way at Haran, crossed the great river, and came to the very place where God wanted him to be. That place was close to the sinful city of Sodom. It was not easy for Abraham to remain in the place where God wanted him to be, and not long afterward he drifted down to Egypt. But by God's sovereignty, Abraham, who had left demonic Chaldee, had forsaken halfway Haran, and had overcome sinful Sodom, was delivered out of worldly Egypt, and was brought back to the place of God's choosing.